Unit 4.2 The Luncheon Introduction William Somerset Maugham, 1874 to 1965, was a distinguished British playwright, novelist, and short story writer. He was among the most popular writers of his era, meaning time, and reputedly, meaning famously, the highest paid author during the 1930s. His work is characterized by a clear, unadorned, meaning simple, style, cosmopolitan, meaning multicultural settings, and a shrewd, meaning clever, understanding of human nature. A most delightfully humorous narrative, meaning funny story, The Luncheon, is a slice of life, meaning stories based on realistic incidents in our routine life, story about Maugham's luncheon date, meaning lunch, proposed to him by a woman whom he hopes is a supporter of his art. Module 1. Text. I caught sight of her, meaning saw her, at the play and in answer to her call, meaning her signaling me. I went over during the interval and sat down beside her. It was long since I had seen her, and if someone had not mentioned her name, I hardly think I would have recognized her. She addressed me brightly, meaning enthusiastically. Well, it's many years since we first met. How time does fly, meaning time passes very quickly. We're none of us getting any younger, meaning both of us have grown older. Do you remember the first time I saw you? You asked me to luncheon. Did I remember? Meaning, of course he remembered. It was 20 years ago and I was living in Paris. I had a tiny apartment and I was earning barely enough money. She had read a book of mine and had written to me about it. I answered, thanking her, and presently, meaning soon, I received from her another letter saying she was passing through Paris and would like to have a chat with me. But her time was limited and the only free moment she had was on the following Thursday, and would I give her a little luncheon at Foyot's afterwards? Foyot's is a restaurant and it was so far beyond my means, meaning too expensive for me to afford, that I had never thought of going there. I had 80 francs, meaning a currency, to last me the rest of the month, and a modest, meaning not too expensive, luncheon would not cost more than 15. If I cut out coffee for the next 2 weeks, I could manage well enough. Explanation. The story starts with the author's sudden and unexpected meeting with a lady at a play. The lady greeted him and remarked that it had been very long since they last met. She asked the author whether he remembered the first time they met, when he had offered to take her out for lunch. On hearing that, the author takes us into the past when the unforgettable incident had taken place. 20 years ago, he was living in Paris and was not earning much. The lady had read his book and written to him appreciating the book, and the author wrote back to thank her. Soon the lady sent another letter expressing her wish to meet him and suggested he take her for a lunch at Foyot's, an expensive restaurant. Though the author did not have much money, he agreed as he thought he would manage by cutting down his own expenses. Module 2. Text. I answered that I would meet my friend at Foyot's on Thursday at 12:30. She was, in appearance, imposing, meaning impressive, rather than attractive, and she gave me the impression of having more teeth, white and large and even, than were necessary for any practical purpose, meaning she smiled more than required. She was talkative, but since she seemed to want to talk about me, I was prepared to be an attentive listener. I was startled, meaning surprised, when the menu was brought, for the prices were a great deal higher than I had thought. But she reassured me, meaning comforted me. I never eat anything for luncheon, she said. Oh, don't say that, I answered generously. I never eat more than one thing. I think people eat for too much nowadays. A little fish, perhaps. I wonder if they have any salmon, meaning an expensive freshwater fish. Explanation. Finally, the author and the lady met at Foyot's. The lady was dressed in an impressive way and gave a wide smile. She was very talkative but spoke mostly about the author, so he listened attentively. The author was surprised to see that the prices on the menu were higher than expected. As if understanding the author's worry, she told him that she did not eat anything for lunch. When the author insisted, she said she would only eat salmon. Module 3. Text. Well, it was early in the year for salmon, and it was not on the menu, but I asked the waiter if there was any. Yes, a beautiful salmon had just come in. It was the first they had had. I ordered it for my guest. The waiter asked her if she would have something while it was being cooked. No, she answered. I never eat more than one thing. Unless you had a little caviar. Meaning eggs of a fish. I never mind caviar. I knew I could not afford caviar, but I could not very well tell her that. For myself, I chose the cheapest dish on the menu, and that was a mutton chop. I think you're unwise to eat meat, she said. I don't believe in overloading my stomach. She ate the caviar and she ate the salmon. She talked gaily, meaning cheerfully, of art and literature and music. But I wondered what the bill would come to. When my mutton chop arrived, she took me quite seriously to task, meaning to scold. I see that you're in the habit of eating a heavy luncheon. I'm sure it's a mistake. Why don't you follow my example and just eat one thing? I couldn't possibly eat anything more. Unless they had some of those giant asparagus, meaning tender shoots of a plant eaten as vegetable. I should be sorry to leave Paris without having some of them. My heart sank, meaning I felt depressed. I had seen them in the shops and I knew they were horribly expensive. My mouth had often watered at the sight of them. I'm not in the least hungry, my guest sighed. But if you insist, I don't mind having some asparagus. I ordered them. Explanation. The author knew that salmon would be quite expensive at that time of the year, yet he ordered it out of courtesy. When the waiter asked if she would have something else, she quickly mentioned caviar, which was again an expensive dish, but he could not say anything. He himself chose the cheapest dish, a mutton chop. Though she had already ordered 2 dishes, the lady lectured him for having the wrong thing as it would be heavy for lunch and went on to order for asparagus. The author knew that it was very expensive, so his heart sank, yet he placed the order. So it can be seen that the lady kept saying she eats only one thing, yet orders dishes one after the other. Module 4. Text. Aren't you going to have any? No, I never eat asparagus. We waited for the asparagus to be cooked. Panic seized me. Meaning, he was now very tense. It was not a question now of how much money I should have left over for the rest of the month, but whether I had enough to pay the bill. It would be mortifying, meaning embarrassing, to find myself 10 francs short and be obliged, meaning to have to do something, to borrow from my guest. I knew exactly how much I had, and if the bill came to more, I made up my mind that I would put my hand in my pocket and with a dramatic cry, start up and say it had been picked. Of course, it would be awkward, meaning embarrassing, if she had not money enough either to pay the bill. Then the only thing would be to leave my watch and say I would come back and pay later. The asparagus appeared. I watched her thrust them down her throat, meaning push them down her throat, in large mouthfuls. At last, she finished. Coffee? I said. Yes, just an ice cream and coffee, she answered. I was past caring now, meaning not worried anymore. So I ordered coffee for myself and an ice cream and coffee for her. You know, there's one thing I thoroughly believe in, she said, as she ate the ice cream. One should always get up from a meal feeling one could eat a little more. Explanation. Now the author was worried if all the money he had would be enough to pay the bill. He thought it would be a shame to borrow from the lady. He then decided that if the bill was more than the money he had, he would pretend that his pocket had been picked, and if the lady too didn't have enough money to pay, he would keep his watch and say he would pay later and then collect the watch. After eating the asparagus, the author asked if she would have coffee and readily agreed and added ice cream for herself. Now he no longer cared about the bill, so he ordered coffee for himself and coffee and ice cream for her. In spite of eating so many things, she lectured the author on the importance of eating less. Module 5. Text. Are you still hungry? I asked faintly, meaning lightly. Oh no, I'm not hungry. You see, I don't eat luncheon. I have a cup of coffee in the morning and then dinner, but I never eat more than one thing for luncheon. I was speaking for you. Oh, I see. Then, a terrible thing happened. While we were waiting for the coffee, the head waiter came up to us bearing a large basket full of huge peaches. But surely peaches were not in season then. I knew a little later, for my guest going on with her conversation absent-mindedly, meaning without thinking, took one. You see, you filled your stomach with a lot of meat, my one miserable little chop, and you can't eat any more, but I've just had a snack and I shall enjoy a peach. The bill came, and when I paid it, I found that I had only enough for a quite inadequate tip, meaning insufficient tip. Her eyes rested for an instant on the 3 francs I left for the waiter, and I knew she thought me mean. But when I walked out of the restaurant, I had the whole month before me and not a penny in my pocket. Follow my example, she said as we shook hands, and never eat more than one thing for luncheon. I'll do better than that, I retorted. Meaning responded quickly, I'll eat nothing for dinner tonight. Humorist, meaning funny, she cried gaily, meaning gladly, jumping into a cab. You're quite a humorist. But I've had my revenge at last. I do not believe that I am a vindictive, meaning nasty, revengeful man. But when the gods take a hand in the matter, it is understandable to observe the result with satisfaction. Today, she weighs 21 stone. Meaning an English unit of weight. Explanation. The lady continued lecturing the author about how she ate only one thing for lunch, though she had already eaten salmon, caviar, asparagus, coffee, and ice cream. On the contrary, the author had eaten only one dish, a meager mutton chop. As if all that she ate was very little, she went on to pick up a peach from a basket that the head waiter carried. After all this, she said, she had only eaten a snack. Fortunately, the bill was within the money that the author had, and he paid a small tip to the waiter, which the lady instantly disapproved with her looks. Finally, when the lady was leaving, she told him to follow her example and eat only one thing. The author humorously said that he would not eat anything for dinner that night. Meaning, the author had no money left, so what he said was the truth. Finally, she left. Currently, when the lady met the author at the theatre, she had put on a lot of weight, and the author was very happy to see that she had put on a lot of weight and thus believed that God had taken his revenge on her.